Now, for those of you that are kind of unaware, Bonza launched with what they would call a point-to-point model. And what that essentially means is you fly from a holiday destination to another holiday destination and skip out the obvious layover. And this is something that almost everybody in the industry said would never work. They said Australia, simply not big enough a country to pull this off. Bonza have launched almost about a year ago, pretty much exactly, and they've made a good go of it. Some of their routes they've dropped and they've added new ones, but we interviewed the CEO last week. He says that they're on the brink of breaking even, which when they've only got sort of 6 aircraft now and they've only really been in full operation for 6 months is really, really, really good. A lot of good experiences people have had, and a lot of people from those smaller places that they service have said this is a game changer for us. Are you surprised by their success? Because point to point is very usual in America.
Yeah, no, and not really, because I lived in the UK when the Jet 2s and the Ryanairs, it was sort of a new concept, right, where you'd fly to a smaller airfield. And I think where it's disruptive, I mean, the US is still very hub and spoke. It's still kind of hard. Again, I live in a hub, so it's easy for me. But I guess if you were to charge, a $600 return airfare Sydney-Melbourne and you were going point to point, it wouldn't work. And that's the point, right? Like it's when you're challenging a bus fare, it's a completely different model. So I think and given the metrics of the Neos and the Max and just how much more efficient they are, it's clever. I mean, if you live in Albury, why do you want to go through Melbourne? Why do you want to go through Sydney if you can get straight to the Sunshine Coast? And you had to have a holiday. Of course you're going to go and do that, aren't you?
It is extraordinary. This is something we touched on earlier, that when we were doing this podcast originally, there was a point we wondered if there'd be an aviation industry left, which is that's how crazy it was. And it's easy now with the benefit to hindsight to go, oh yeah, it was always going to be all right. But there was a point we really didn't know, when it felt like it was the apocalypse, and everyone was going crazy. And
I still feel like it's not like it was. Like it's a bit Frankensteinish, I think, at the moment. I still think aviation is the fleets ended up getting very old. Like I remember, I flew Cathay Pacific from LA to Hong Kong last week, and last time I flew Cathay, it was nice. Yeah. This time it was old. Nice cabin crew and all the rest, but the aeroplane was tired. And I think that there is a lot of that. To me, it seems like all the new airplanes went to the US. I mean, the fleet age there must be a lot younger than it is now, and no doubt Boeing had to cut some pretty epic deals. But I've been talking to a few pilots of the Max as well, and there's some concern. I actually spoke to a pilot the other day that left the airline to stop flying the Max, purely based on he said to me, it's literally like even the switches and some of the buttons and the paint. He says the difference between a previous generation 7, even though it's exactly the same. He says it's like it's made out of everything's made out of something cheaper, or it's not screwed in properly. I mean, he was just talking about the number of safety reports that this is an Australian airline had been. Well, probably shouldn't have said that. And the guys that work for us in the US and the UK. Say a similar thing. Really nice airplane, a lot of power, very, very thrifty, but just the flight computers just cycle off, or it carries an engineering fault that they're waiting 6 months for a part. Is it going to fall out of the sky? No. Well, I don't know, but I presume no. Now you would certainly hope not. But I think that there's a general consensus that just as it takes a long time for your culture to erode and for these things to slip in, it's a long time for your culture to rebuild and get to the point where your quality management systems. Was I reading it? Was it an article that you wrote? I was talking about like 1,800 safety notes have been written up now by airlines and given to Boeing on the 737 MAX.
Yeah, this is the issue, because again, when we were doing this show previously, we were talking about all the problems with the MAX, and the FAA grounded it for 18 months or so, over 2 crashes. I think killed nearly 350 people. I think it was altogether. And when the FAA kind of got to the end of their investigation, they fined them $2.5 billion I think it was. And obviously there was an actual technical issue with the aircraft, but really it wasn't about that. It was about a cultural issue at Boeing. And essentially what the FAA said is that the Boeing employees kind of misled and deceived their safety inspectors. And effectively, they were sort of aware that there was a problem, but they were sort of hushing it up. And that's what led to this extraordinary fine. Now, then what you had is Boeing desperately tried to rebuild their reputation and to rebuild confidence in the MAX, because this is a large part of their business model. This is one of the most flown aircraft in the world. A lot of airlines have got very, very, very big orders that Boeing cannot afford to lose. And the kind of narrative a couple of years ago was, well, this is now the safest aircraft in the world. It's been checked so often. We've put all this behind us. And to be fair, it did feel like things were sort of getting back to normal.
And then the doors fall off.
And then the door falls off. It's the most extraordinary story, because literally the door, or the door plug, came off in midair. It's something. And once the investigation occurred, extraordinarily, it literally turned out that the bolts it wasn't screwed in correctly, effectively. Now, essentially, the FAA have launched a kind of a full investigation into this. They grounded it for about 3 weeks. They've subsequently allowed them to return to service, but only after each one has been checked a lot. Now, Boeing would tell you, and the airlines would tell you, that this is purely a problem with that particular variant of the MAX, and that they are checking them all, and that this thing will get sorted out. But yet again, if we're talking about bolts not being fixed on correctly, that suggests there's one hell of a poor culture that you're not even checking that when you're signing off the aircraft. And it does feel like, how on earth can something like this happen again to the same aircraft? You'd think everybody would be obsessed about it now.
Yeah, I mean, there's that famous saying that originated out of Southwest Airlines, which is, if there's oil stains on the seat of an airplane, what's to say is going on in the engines? So it's that whole smoke and fire thing, isn't it? Look, you don't want to unpick into the details. You don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of the airworthiness directives and all the rest of it. But there's enough. There are many conversations that are going around from the pilot community about just generally things being less Boeing than the NGs or the previous generation. How does that play out? Look, I don't know. Is it when the F-111 came out, when the Hornet came, everything when it was new always had a problem, and it was a lemon. I mean, these are complex machines, and it's only after you have tens of thousands of cycles that all the little bugs on. I mean, if you play PlayStation, and the billions of dollars that goes into a game and it doesn't work, it breaks and there's bugs. So, and given the nature of the technology, so how much of it is the culture on the up? It must. I don't know. I don't work there. But it must be on the up. Is it there where it was previously, when it was, if it ain't Boeing, I'm not going? Probably not. And there's still clearly, work to be done. No one wants to get on an airplane and have the door come off. I mean, that's kind of basic 101.
Again, one of the other kind of greater topics we talked to was the kind of rivalry between Boeing and Airbus and their relative success. Again, since you've been...
I think Airbus is laughing. I mean,
yeah, of course they are.
You look at, I think Qantas is going to be an all Airbus fleet, for example, right?
Yeah.
In the near future. And you look at the orders, out of Paris, and I think you wonder whether people are only buying a MAX because they're getting a good deal. And I know that, I was talking to somebody a little while ago that it's actually in fleet, they buy the airplanes, right? And they're saying every airplane at the moment is about 30% over what it was, including the MAX. But, you wonder whether Michael O'Leary, the big fleet guys that are just sitting there and getting some hush money paid or something to keep flying these things. I don't know.
This is a very sort of famous story. It was within, I think, a week after the FAA had cleared the MAX and had done its fine. Within a week, you had Ryanair confirm this gigantic order. And I don't think they went into financials, but the very obvious undertone was, we got one hell of a deal.
Yeah.
And if there's one airline that's going to get you a deal, it's that one.
No, absolutely right. And that, I guess, is the upside of being an all 737 fleet. I know Virgin would probably like to get their hands on some of those as well, because it is economically, it's a great airplane. I mean, it really does unlock a lot of commercial upside, and Bonza is leaning into that. I mean, fundamentally, if the airplane gets from A to B more cheaply, it gets passed on. And it gets passed on means there's more customers, more flights, and these point-to-point routes start to stack up a little bit more. So, look, it's clearly, if this were the Lord of the Rings, we've only just found Gollum in the ring. There's plenty more left, plenty more chapters left in the 737 MAX book, I think.
Yeah, but it feels at the moment that Boeing, everything kind of that can go wrong for them does go wrong for them. But with Airbus, it's the opposite. So another big story that we saw 4 weeks ago was this Japan Airlines incident involving the A350-900, I think. And it was the first major accident involving this aircraft. Now, 9 times out of 10, a major incident, this would be horrendously bad news for Airbus. But actually, all the publicity came out the other way, because every single person on that aircraft got off, which is obviously a tribute to the cabin crew and Japan Airlines as well. But certainly a lot of the talk was actually, it's because it was a new generation aircraft. It's because of how Airbus designed it, that effectively the time for it being on fire to it completely sort of exploding was enough time for them to get off. And almost all the publicity was, isn't this an excellent aircraft? Which is extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. And a bit like a Volvo, right? People buy a Volvo because, if you crash, you're going to get out alive. If you look at that, and I was talking to an A350 pilot about this last week, one of my team, and he was saying, first of all, it's one of the worst things to have happen in A350 is the nose wheel to not work effectively, but to lose your nose wheel or to impact the nose wheel. But equally, is it the use of composites? Does a composite not buckle and break and leak fuel? I mean, composites are a more robust structure generally. And if you look at that when it comes to cyclists and carbon fiber bikes, the strength compared to a metal bike. So I'm sure there's some truth to it, but I thought what was interesting there was the conversation around the firefighters and how the firefighters didn't respond. They watched it. And looking at that, I can't recall the other incident. There was another incident where all the passengers were off. The firefighters were putting out the fire, but because of the heat, one of the engines exploded and the firefighter was killed. And how in this particular incident that the A350 was pretty much left to burn. So most of the photos and media being media were the sensational look at it on fire images, but when the aircraft's being evacuated, apparently it wasn't too bad. So, I mean, there's no such thing as bad PR, I guess.